a broke-down summer resort in the Catskills, a doctor's daughter who'd rather be dancing than debating the Peace Corps, and a staff dance instructor who was never, ever supposed to fall for a guest. That's Dirty Dancing, 1987, directed by Emile Ardolino, starring Jennifer Grey as Frances Baby Houseman and Patrick Swayze as Johnny Castle. It's one of the most quoted, most rewatched, most reenacted at weddings movies of the last 40 years. But almost none of it was supposed to happen this way. The lift wasn't supposed to work. The song almost didn't get sung. And at one point, the studio in charge of the whole thing seriously discussed destroying it. So grab your dance shoes, and let's count down 15 weird facts about Dirty Dancing. And stick around for number 1, because a studio executive's actual advice on this film was reportedly to torch the negative and cash the insurance check. If you're new here, hit subscribe, and let's head up to Kellerman's. Every single person who has ever thrown their back out at a wedding reception owes a debt to one unrehearsed take. Jennifer Grey has said flatly that she and Patrick Swayze never practiced the climactic lake lift before the cameras rolled. She was, in her own words, really scared and protective of her body, and she gave a hard no to running it beforehand. There was, as she put it, no room for a panic attack. So the plan became, do it once, do it live, and hope. It worked because of Swayze. He trained at the Harkness and Joffrey ballet schools, spent years lifting professional dancers overhead, and by that point in the shoot, Grey trusted him completely. As she later told reporters, he was simply such a strong, well-trained partner that she couldn't imagine attempting to move with anyone else, and she still isn't sure how so many couples have found the nerve to try it since. So the single most imitated move in film history is, technically, a first take that nobody had a backup plan for. Before test audiences ever saw a frame of it, Dirty Dancing had already run into trouble with the word dirty. Screenwriter Eleanor Bergstein has said that Canadian customs officials once held up shipments of the film's dailies because agents assumed, based purely on the title, that they were looking at pornography. That mix-up got serious enough that the production floated swapping the title out entirely, briefly considering the alternate name I was a teenage mambo queen. Imagine that marquee. No, nobody puts baby in a corner. No instantly recognizable two-word title on posters for the next 4 decades. Just a mambo queen and a lot of confused teenagers. In the end, the filmmakers stuck with the name that had caused all the trouble in the first place, and it turned out to be one of the most bankable titles of the decade. Before Patrick Swayze became inseparable from the role, a parade of future stars auditioned for Johnny. Billy Zane tested for the part. So did Val Kilmer. So did a young Benicio del Toro, years before either of them became household names. On the other side of the romance, Sarah Jessica Parker and Winona Ryder were both in the running to play Baby before the role went to Jennifer Grey. None of it stuck, because once Swayze walked into the room, the search effectively ended. He had the ballet training the role demanded, the physical presence, and, crucially, chemistry with Grey that nobody else in that casting pool could match. It's strange to imagine an alternate universe Dirty Dancing starring any of those names, but for a while, that alternate universe was a very real possibility, sitting in a casting director's notes. Here's the part that makes the whole movie feel like an accident of fate. The man who became cinema's most famous dance instructor had actively tried to quit dancing. Swayze suffered a serious knee injury back in his younger years, one severe enough that he reportedly listed "no dancing" on his own acting resume as a hard boundary, trying to steer his career away from the kind of physically brutal choreography that could finish off an already damaged joint. He and his wife, Lisa Nemi, even ran a side business together specifically so he could afford to be selective about which parts he took. Then Dirty Dancing landed on his desk, a role built entirely around movement and physical performance, and he took it anyway. The choreography, especially sequences involving balance and repeated weight-bearing lifts, hammered that old injury throughout the shoot. He would later describe the joint as essentially bone-on-bone by that point in his career. He kept dancing regardless, and the role that broke his own rule became the one that defined his entire career. One of the film's signature ballads almost never made it into Dirty Dancing at all, because by the time it got there, it had already been turned down twice. Swayze co-wrote She's Like the Wind years earlier with songwriter Stacey Weidlitz, originally intending it for his 1984 film Grandview, USA. It didn't make that soundtrack. He tried again to get it into 1980's XS Youngblood, and it got passed over a second time. It was only when Dirty Dancing's music team heard it that the song finally found a home, and it went on to become a genuine hit, climbing into the top 5 of the Billboard Hot 100. A song two different movies had already discarded ended up permanently welded to the film that finally said yes to it. Before it became an Oscar winner, I've Had the Time of My Life had a rejection pile of its own. The song was reportedly offered first to Donna Summer, who passed. Accounts suggest she wasn't keen on being attached to a movie called Dirty Dancing. From there, the producers went down a list of major names. Lionel Richie, Daryl Hall, and Kim Carnes were all approached and all declined. Even Bill Medley, the deep-voiced half of the Righteous Brothers, who eventually recorded it, initially said no, reportedly because he thought the title sounded like it belonged on a disreputable video store shelf, and because his wife was about to give birth. What changed his mind was the pairing. Once producers moved the session and brought in Jennifer Warnes as his duet partner, Medley agreed. The result won the Academy Award for Best Original Song and became one of the most recognizable movie themes of the decade. After nearly every artist with the clout to sing it had already said no, nobody built Dirty Dancing's soundtrack to be a monster hit. It became what anyway? The album spent an extraordinary run at the top of the Billboard 200, reportedly more than 4 straight months at number 1, and has been credited with selling upward of 14 million copies in the United States alone, with worldwide estimates running considerably higher across various reissues and formats. I've Had the Time of My Life won the Oscar. Hungry Eyes put Eric Carmen back on the radio charts after more than a decade away from the top. The record was so deep that a second, follow-up album of leftover tracks also went multi-platinum on its own. For a film set in 1963 with a mostly 1980s soundtrack, that's a strange kind of time travel, and it's a big part of why the movie still feels inseparable from its music decades later. Long before test audiences ever saw the finished film, one storyline nearly got cut for business reasons rather than creative ones. According to reporting on the production, an acne cream company had been circling the movie as a potential promotional partner, drawn by its built-in teen audience. Once they learned the plot involved a character's illegal, back-alley abortion, a serious risk for a mainstream teen movie in the 1980s, the sponsor walked away entirely. Studio pressure followed, pushing screenwriter Eleanor Bergstein to cut the storyline. She refused. The subplot had been written into the film on purpose, and she wasn't willing to remove the one element that gave the story real stakes beyond the dance floor. The sponsorship money disappeared, the storyline stayed. It's a large part of why Dirty Dancing reads as a much heavier film than its marketing ever let on. You'd assume a summer romance about a Catskills resort would sail to an easy teen-friendly rating. It didn't. According to accounts of the ratings process, the film went through 3 separate rounds with the MPAA before finally being downgraded from an R to a PG-13. And the sticking point wasn't nudity in the traditional sense. Much of that had already been trimmed. The board's concern was reportedly the dance sequences themselves, which were deemed too overtly sexual for a lower rating on their own. Getting to PG-13 mattered enormously. It's the rating that let the exact audience the film was built for, teenagers who would rewatch it obsessively, actually get into theaters to see it in the first place. The chemistry between Johnny and Baby didn't come from an easy, instant friendship. It came from real tension. Gray and Swayze had worked together before, on 1984's Red Dawn, and by her own account she came away from that experience exhausted by him. His big energy, his pranks, the way he carried himself on set. Swayze, for his part, wrote candidly in his own memoir about how emotionally unpredictable their dynamic could be during Dirty Dancing's production, describing swings between real friction and real warmth on set. Choreographer Kenny Ortega has said he leaned into that dynamic rather than smoothing it over, calling the pair human fireworks, precisely because the conflict and the connection both felt genuine on camera. Whatever tension existed between them off-screen, it's arguably part of why their on-screen chemistry never feels performed. One of the warmest, most human moments in the film wasn't written into any draft of the script. During a rehearsal scene where Johnny is walking Baby through basic steps, Jennifer Grey kept breaking character, not performing, just genuinely laughing, because she was ticklish and Swayze's hand kept brushing her arm. They'd reset and try again, and she'd lose it again. Swayze's visible frustration in the footage wasn't acted either. It was a tired performer trying to land a clean take, while his scene partner kept dissolving into giggles. When the filmmakers reviewed the footage, they recognized what they had. A moment where two actors stopped looking like characters and started looking like two people genuinely enjoying each other's company. It made the final cut, and it remains one of the more quietly beloved beats in the film, a blown take that became a keeper. The lake sequence plays like the peak of a golden summer. It was shot in the fall. Much of that material was filmed in October, when the weather had already turned. Swayze himself later wrote that the water was horrifyingly, hypothermically cold, and described how even lifting someone as light as Grey becomes a serious physical strain once you're both fighting cold water and buoyancy at the same time. Multiple retakes only made the exposure worse. What plays on screen as a warm, sun-drenched romantic memory was, behind the camera, closer to an endurance test, two actors trying to sell July while genuinely risking hypothermia in October. Somehow, none of that struggle shows up in the finished scene, which may be exactly why it still holds up. Dirty Dancing's theatrical run was solid. It eventually pulled in roughly $214 million worldwide on a budget of about $5 million. But its real transformation happened after it left theaters. When the film hit VHS, it did something home video wasn't built around at the time. People bought it instead of renting it, and they did so in huge numbers. Reports at the time noted it sold well over 1 million copies in its first week alone, an almost unheard of pace for a rental-driven format in the late 1980s. That shift mattered. It's the difference between a movie you catch once and a movie you own, the kind that gets replayed at sleepovers, worn thin on tape, and permanently lodged into pop culture through sheer repetition rather than a single big opening weekend. Long before Vestron Pictures picked it up, Dirty Dancing's screenplay made the rounds through essentially every major studio in Hollywood and got turned down by every single one of them, reportedly 43 times in total. It finally found a home at Vestron, a small home video distributor making its first ever theatrical feature. Even then, the deal only worked because the producers agreed to cut the budget roughly in half, down to about $5 million, at a time when the average studio film cost well over twice that. That budget constraint meant no major stars, no big-name director, decisions that, in hindsight, arguably let the film's chemistry and choreography carry the entire project instead of star power. It's a strange thing to sit with. One of the most enduring romantic films of its era was the movie nobody else wanted to make. Even after Vestron committed to making it, the people closest to the finished product didn't believe in it. When the rough cut came together, the reaction inside the studio was reportedly closer to panic than excitement. According to Vestron executive Mitchell Cannell, when producer Aaron Russo screened the film, his verdict was blunt: burn the negative and collect the insurance. Not recut it. Not send it straight to video. Destroy it and take the payout, because the policy on the film stock was worth more than the movie itself, in his estimation. They released it anyway. It didn't open as a runaway hit, but word of mouth built steadily. Audiences went back for repeat viewings, and the film that one producer wanted to torch went on to gross over $214 million worldwide, spawn a chart-dominating soundtrack, and become one of the most quoted movies of the last 40 years. Sometimes the industry's professional judgment is exactly the thing that turns out to be worth nothing. So there you have it, 15 weird facts about Dirty Dancing. Near-miss casting, twice rejected songs, a knee held together with willpower, and a studio that nearly burned the whole thing before anyone else got the chance to fall in love with it. What surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if you want more deep dives into the movies that never should have worked and somehow became unforgettable anyway.